Ladies and gentlemen, hey, hi, how you doing? Welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for stopping by. As we know, one of the main goals that Raven has sort of set out for themselves over the course of the last couple of seasons is to generally lower the TTK, aka make it take more shots to kill per weapon to actually get that full kill or that cleanup, whatever the case may be. They want to make it so that you're not dying instantly, basically, here in Warzone, which leaves a lot of people wondering, well, what are the best weapons to use? What are the fastest killing weapons with the best TTKs now? Because we keep seeing those weapons that have great time to kills just lowered and lowered and lowered and nerfed and nerfed and nerfed. So everything in general is dropping down to that lower TTK overall, right? But there is still a handful of weapons that will absolutely fry everyone and everything, and today we are focusing in on those weapons, specifically the top 5 fastest TTK weapons that we currently have here in Warzone. So as we go through them all, if you enjoy the video at any point, let me know by dropping a like on it. Would be seriously appreciated, as it does really help out the channel. And of course, if you're new here or if you have not already subscribed, feel free to do so. That way you can always stay up to date with absolutely everything going on in COD, news, updates, loadouts, tips. It is all right here every single day. Also, season 6 is coming up here pretty soon. If you want to stock up on any G Fuel products in time for the new season, WhosImmortal has got you covered there on any new tubs, shaker cups, or starter packs. Now, when it comes to the best TTKs, like I said, we've seen the general TTK lowered quite a bit over the course of the last couple of months. Raven's really gone out of their way to make sure that we have that slower TTK in general compared to what we had, you know, at this time last year, or definitely at the start of the year of Cold War, where we had things like the DMR and the AUG and the FFAR just frying everything. But now there's still a couple of weapons that are really good, either up close or over range. The first one I want to look at here is the PKM. This one has about a 650 millisecond TTK over range, which is actually very competitive with a lot of the other LMGs, a lot of the other rifles. It's actually better than, quite frankly, most of them, if I'm being honest. That said, it isn't a Modern Warfare weapon. It's a bit slower. Obviously, it's an LMG, so it's not helping its case there in terms of mobility. But really, the PKM is such a good gun right now because of the sheer damage output. This thing hits like a truck. It's going to fry at all ranges, and the TTK really reflects that. It's just a laser beam. Very low recoil, high damage, super easy to use. Really, the only drawback is that pretty bad mobility. So if you can look past that, obviously you're going to be using a secondary of some sort, probably an SMG or a pistol that has good mobility. So you got that covered elsewhere in the class. When it comes specifically to the PKM here, of course, though, we're starting off with the monolithic suppressor, keeping us off the minimap, extending that range some. For the barrels, you can go 2 different routes, either the extended barrel or the heavy barrel. In most cases, I do opt for the heavy barrel. As I said, this thing is already slow as can be. The heavy barrel is not going to slow you down nearly as much as that extended barrel is. Obviously, one of the cons here is that negative movement speed. The heavy barrel does not have that. It's not going to help out with the control as much as the extended, but you have other attachments elsewhere that can bring that back. And let's be honest, it's an MW weapon. The recoil really isn't all that bad. We are still going to use the snatch grip, though. This helps out with that recoil, and you also get a better ADS speed out of that too. Pretty unique attachment that I honestly absolutely love. I'm also going to go ahead and run that VOK 3x optic on there as well, pretty much the preferred optic for range for MW weapons. Then when it comes to the last attachment, you got a handful of choices, right? Personally, I really like the tac laser. You get some snappiness with that ADS speed. It just helps out with that mobility some. Keeps it pretty consistent over range. Some players are going to try and go for that bigger magazine so they don't have to reload as often because the base reload is pretty slow. But personally, I don't like the slowdown on that. You're making the weapon even slower. Some people opt for a stipple grip tape. That way you can get some better ADS out of that, or maybe even sleight of hand because that base reload is so slow as is. You can really go with anything there, and you're not going to have a bad setup whatsoever. I think sleight of hand is what I'll lean towards, specifically for keeping that reload semi-decent, but overall PKM, absolute beast. Now, next up, we actually have the OTS. This thing has about a 500 to 700 millisecond TTK within 15 meters. Obviously, the 700 milliseconds on the bit of a higher end compared to some other weapons, but if you're able to consistently land those chest, neck, and head shots, that 500 millisecond TTK in between like 500 and 600 more realistically within those 15 meters is actually very doable. There have been some changes to the OTS lately with the whole recoil adjustment. Obviously, they nerfed some multipliers here and there, so it's not nearly as strong as it once was. But even after a couple of nerfs, this thing still is one of the best SMGs, one of the best close range weapons, like I said, if you're an accurate player. Personally, I don't really think the recoil's all that bad, especially when you got to factor in your actual range in a gunfight, right? Recoil over range is much more noticeable. The further you are away from a target, the more recoil you're going to notice. But if you're up close within 15 meters, the enemy's bodies are going to be very large targets to hit. It's very easy to stay on target and track a chest, neck, or a headshot. So that recoil nerf that we saw recently, not that big of a factor. And like I said, if you're able to consistently land those upper body shots, the TTK is going to be phenomenal. It's such a fun gun to use, by far one of my favorite SMGs. Unfortunately, the class setup here is not super creative. It's pretty much that copy and paste Cold War setup. We're starting off with Cruise Suppressor and Task Force Barrel. That way we get our best range and velocity and also some better control out of that. I like to go for the Tiger Team Spotlight. This thing already has incredible mobility. Obviously, you want to be able to get within that 15-meter range as fast as possible, so having good mobility is a crucial part of that. The base stats here are already great. Tiger Team just helps out even more. I'm also going to opt for that VDV 40-round fast mag, get that lightning fast reload. And then I know some people as of lately like to use the Spetsnaz grip because of that recoil nerf. You can definitely get away with using that. Personally, I don't think it needs it. Once again, I instead opt for that Serpent Wrap. I get that snappier ADS and I love the feel of that. You could also go for the skeletal stock there too and get some better mobility overall, but this is my go-to OTS setup. It has been for quite some time. The recent nerfs didn't really change it all that much, and it is still a beam up close. Now, another fantastic TTK weapon is actually the DMR. Now, for what it's worth, just to preface, no, the DMR meta is not back. Nowhere even close to what it was before, but specifically for a close range weapon, the DMR recently has sort of come back into the spotlight, and it's a very, very good weapon with one specific thing needed: headshots. If you're within, that 20-meter range and you're able to land 1 or 2 headshots in a gunfight with this thing, the TTK is actually insane. It could be sub 400 milliseconds in some cases, which is just nuts. If you're just landing, consistent like stomach, chest, and upper torso shots, that'll be around like a 500 to 600 millisecond TTK. Obviously, I got to factor in the fact that it is a semi-auto weapon, which makes it a lot harder to use than every other weapon on this list. So this is definitely geared towards more high-skill players and players who can spam a weapon very fast and control it while they are using a semi-auto weapon in and of itself. But if you can master this thing, it is very rewarding for close range engagements. It's just that entry barrier that is so much higher than every other weapon we're talking about today that sort of makes people stray away from this, but there's no denying the headshots on this thing and just the general damage is still pretty crazy, even though it's not the OG incredibly powerful DMR. So we are once again going to start off with that agency suppressor for all the same reasons as always. Specifically when it comes to the barrel, titanium here is a must-have. You absolutely don't want to be using any other barrel other than titanium, especially if you're trying to use this for those CQB engagements. So that's a very, very big thing here. When it comes to an underbarrel, I'm going to go ahead and run the Field Agent foregrip just because, like I said, it's semi-auto. If you're going to spam it, that recoil is going to be a lot more noticeable, even though you are in some close range fights. So that'll help out with the general control there. Personally, do you need a magazine? Not always in some cases. 30 round I feel like is sufficient enough for some of those more aggressive players. Some players who maybe play a bit slower but still want to use this as a close range weapon might not need that magazine attachment. And when it comes to the final attachment, personally, I'm not really a huge fan of the base optics. The iron sights just aren't that great in my opinion. You might think differently, and if that's the case, definitely run a stock or a Tiger Team Spotlight, get some better mobility out of that. But if you do want an optic because you're not a fan of those iron sights, you got a lot of options here. Some players like the 2x because it has that sort of increased zoom. You get some decent medium range capabilities with that. Other players want to strictly focus on close range, where you use something like a Cobra red dot, maybe a mill stop reflex, or even a quick dot LED or the Hawksmoor sight. Other players are going to go for something like the SUSAT or maybe even the 3x if they want more consistency between close and medium range. Like I said, you got a ton of options here. Really just comes down to personal preference. I like sticking with the 3x, even though that is not the most optimal close range sight. It still works, at least for my play style, and I enjoy using that. Now, looking back at close range, another weapon that has a phenomenal TTK still is going to be the Fennec, another MW weapon. You don't see too many of them mentioned anymore, but in this case, up close, this thing is going to fry. The only thing with this is that it doesn't really have great range whatsoever. It is predominantly a must use in very, very close range fights. It's got about that 500 millisecond TTK within 15 meters. But if you're anything past 15 meters, this thing is not going to be it. So it is a weapon that you pretty much have to force yourself to use in extremely close range fights. But hey, in those areas, this thing's nuts. It is actually a melt machine when it comes down to it. The fire rate that this thing has is incredible. And with the damage it has, while it's not incredibly great, that fire rate sort of makes up for it. So you're landing shots like crazy, and you will literally feel like you just erase people if you're within that, necessary range for this thing to be super, super good. Something I love about this thing is the deadfall barrel. It basically is just like the monolithic integral suppressor on the MWMP5. It's a muzzle and a barrel combined. So you get better range, better control, and better velocity while also staying off the map. And it's basically a 2-for-1 attachment. Fantastic. You love to see it. I also go for a Merc foregrip here to get that better hip fire control and better accuracy as well. It's going to make it really, really good for trying to hip fire up close, or sort of that transition period between hip firing and ADSing in a really close range fight. You absolutely have to run the 40 round drum mags just because that fire rate is so insane. You're already reloading a ton as is, so that's a pretty much 100% necessary attachment there. And coinciding with that, I also feel like sleight of hand is as well, because even with 40 round mags, you still are running through that ammo like no tomorrow at hyper speed, so you're reloading all the time, and having that fast reload is actually super clutch. And then finally, I'm gonna go for something like the no stock option. You could also go for the TAC CQS, gives you a better ADS speed, but no stock to me, just like on the MP5 with a collapsible stock, that better movement speed is just so crucial, considering MW weapons already aren't great for mobility, as we talked about with the PKM. So getting that added stat boost in any possible scenario is crucial in my opinion. And then obviously it's a sub, you want to have ideal mobility, so this setup in general, incredible for close range. And then to close things out, the #1 best TTK weapon in the entire game, I'm sure some of you saw this coming, the MG82. This thing has a sub 600 millisecond TTK over range, which is kind of unheard of for the vast majority of weapons in the game. The sort of entry barrier to this gun is the fact that its recoil is not super ideal. I don't think it's that bad. Like, it's definitely something you can learn, but it's going to take more effort to learn that compared to something like, let's say, the Krig or the Farah or other long-range weapons that are sort of laser beams. This thing is not that case. This thing is definitely a lot more difficult to use because that increased recoil. But if you're able to land shots with this thing, enemies aren't going to know what's hitting them. They're going to be dead before they can react because the TTK is so good over range. Like, this thing literally does delete players left, right, and center at pretty much any range in the game, because the fire rate and because the damage here, those two factors combined to make this thing insanely good. But like I said, it's a more difficult weapon to use, so I feel like it's semi-balanced in that regard. But this is going to be like a basic long-range setup here. We're going for the agency suppressor, especially because that does help out with the vertical recoil control. You could either go for match grade or task force here. I always go for match grade though, just because task force, while it is going to give you a little bit better range, it's going to slow you down even more, and LMGs as is already are not great. So getting that that sprinting move speed a little bit better if you have to run with this thing out, getting that aim locking move speed a little bit better is also going to be key. So match grade to me is definitely the more optimal barrel in that case, but either or will work depending on your playstyle. You have to go for the field agent grip again because that recoil, it's just not ideal. I go for the 3x optic like always. Then for the last attachment, you got a couple of choices yet again. I wouldn't really ever use a laser in this case because you're not using this for that sprinting weapon. Most of the time you're going to have an OTS or a Fennec or an MP5 or something else as a secondary there, so you're not planning on running around with this thing. But if you have to have it out, obviously you want certain attachments to help you out if that's the case. A lot of players will go for either the 125 round mag or the fast mag because the reload is not ideal. Obviously, you're not going to be reloading fast with the 125, but it's going to help you reload less frequently. So sort of weighing the pros versus the cons there. I always go for fast mag though, but you could also go for something like the Raider stock if you wanted some better mobility on here and, make that a little bit more aggressive in that case. But for me, the magazine is probably a little bit more important just because you're going to have to reload. And when you do, you don't want that to be the death of you. So fast mag can definitely help out there. But yeah, with all that being said, those are the top 5 best TTK weapons in Warzone currently, for some close range, for some long range, a little bit of mix of both in there to help you guys out. If you enjoyed the video though, let me know by dropping a like on it. Would be seriously appreciated. And of course, if you're new here or if you have not already subscribed, feel free to do so. That way you can always stay up to date with everything going on in COD, news, updates, loadouts, tips. It is all right here every single day. But once again, thank you so much for tuning in. And until next time, take it easy. Have an awesome rest of your day, and I will catch you guys later. Peace out.